We continue now at the top of Daf Samech Daled Amud Beis in Mesechet Bava Metzia. This is Bava Metzia Daf 64b. And the previous Amud Abai said that it's permitted for a person to say to his friend that he's going to advance some money for a barrel of wine, and then the idea will be that if the barrel of wine sours, so then the seller is the one that takes responsibility for that. If the barrel of wine, however, either goes up or down in value, so then that's going to be upon the buyer. That's going to be permitted. And so the Gemara says, why is that permitted? Hai karov l'schar v'rachok lehefsedu. Isn't this a case which is close to profit and it's a very small chance of losing anything? Rashi says, karov l'schar im yikra, meaning to say, he's advancing the money, and if this wine goes up in value, he's going to profit. And rachok lehefsed, it's very unlikely that the buyer who's advancing the money is going to lose because if it sours, lo makavelola. He's not accepting that loss upon himself. That's going to be upon the seller. And the Gemara and the Rashi continues, V'tanya b'pirkin, we learned in our parak in the Brisa, karov l'schar v'rachok lehefsed, that if you have such a case where it's likely he's going to profit, it's very unlikely he's going to lose, Rasha d'shakal ribis, he's considered a Rasha who's taking interest. And the logic is, d'kevan deino mekabel olav achrayis hamekach, because if he's not accepting responsibility on what he's buying, he's giving money now and accepting no responsibility, as in this case where if it sours, it's not the buyer's responsibility. So nimtza she'ein zemecher, it comes out, this is not really a sale. Umos halvahin etzlo, and the money he's giving is more like a loan. Ukrivas haschar, and the reason why it's set up in a way where it's likely that he's going to profit, machmas ribisu, that's really just like interest, since he's giving a loan. So the other party is saying, the borrower essentially is saying, since you're giving me a loan, therefore I'm going to make it more likely that you are going to profit, and therefore it should be a problem of ribis. And so the Gemara continues, Amar Lei said back to him, Kevan de Mekabel Aleh Zula, since he's not only accepting, the buyer is not only saying that if it goes up in value, he stands to benefit, but he is saying that if it depreciates in value, then he's going to take the loss. So then already Karov Lazev Lazehu, then it's considered even. It's possible he's going to profit, it's possible he's going to lose, and that's why we do not consider it to be a case of ribis. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Hamalves Chaver, if somebody lends money to his friend, Lo Yador B'Chatzeiro Chinam, so he shouldn't live in that person's chatzer for free, V'lo Yiskor Mimenu B'Pachos, he also shouldn't rent from him at a cheaper price, Mimnei Shu Ribis, that's considered interest. The reason why he's getting either this free or this reduced price is because of the fact that he lent him money. And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Yosef bar Menyume, Amar Rav Nachman, Rav Yosef bar Menyume says that Rav Nachman says, Afal Pisha Amru, even though they say, Hador b'chotzer chavero shalom idaito, if somebody lives in the courtyard of his friend without his knowledge, Eino tzarech l'halos lo schar, he doesn't have to pay him rent. But nevertheless, even though in that case you don't have to pay rent, but hilveyu v'dar b'chatzero, but let's say he lends him money, and he then lives in his chatzer, tzarech l'halos lo schar, then he does have to pay him rent, because if he doesn't pay him rent, then it's already like interest. The Gemara says, my kamashmalan, well, what is Rav Nachman teaching us? Tanina, we already learned that in the Mishnah. It said, Hamal ves chavero, that if somebody lends money to his friend, lo yoder b'chatzeiro chinam, he can't live in his chatzer for free, v'lo yiskor mimenu b'pachos, and he also can't rent from him for a reduced rate, mivnei shu ribis, because that's considered to be ribis, it's considered to be interest, so that seems to be the same thing. And the Gemara says, imi masnisin, if I only had our Mishnah's halacha, sahava aminas, I would have thought, hani mili b'chatzer d'kaim agra, that's specifically true if you have a chatzer, then in general it's meant to be rented out, so therefore if this person is living in it, he's causing the owner to essentially lose out, because he could have rented it out to someone else, unless this person pays. And furthermore, v'gaver da'avid lemegar, and we're talking about a person who is looking to rent something. That's what we would call zenene v'zechaser. The person renting, who is the lender, he's nene, he's getting a benefit, he's looking, he needs to rent something, and the other person is losing out by this if he's not paid, because he's looking to rent out the property. So I would have thought that in that particular situation, by zenene v'zechaser, so then already he shouldn't live there for free, because in such a situation it's considered to be like ribis. But let's say it's a courtyard which wasn't meant to be rented out. The owner never intended on renting it out. And also it's a person who doesn't really need to rent an area, so he's not benefiting. It's a there's no real benefit to the lender here, and the person who's giving the property is not really losing anything. So in such a situation, I might say that's already not considered a problem of ribis. He's not even really getting a benefit at all. And so that's what Rav Nachman is teaching, Kamash Malon. Rav Nachman is teaching that there is indeed, in this case as well, a problem of ribis. And Rashi explains, even though they say in Bava Kama in the second parak, that again, in general, you don't need to pay rent for this situation. Now, the case over there happens to be talking about a chotzer, a courtyard. The Gemara there says we're talking about a courtyard that is not meant to be rented out, so there's no real loss to the owner of the property. But the person who's living there, so he does need to actually rent out a place to live. The case over there essentially was meaning the person living in the property is benefiting, and the person who's allowing him to live in the property is not losing anything. So over there, again, the general halach is you don't have to pay rent in that case. And so again, the point over here was that in a case where there was a loan, so then rent does have to be paid because it's considered to be interest. And then the Gemara said, now I understand that it's a problem of interest if it was a courtyard that was meant to be rented out, and the person was also looking to rent, meaning this lender, he would have rented something else. If he didn't find this property, so he's getting benefit. And also the owner of the property, he's losing out if he doesn't get paid, because he's trying to rent it out to other people. So there, of course, it would be an issue of ribis, an issue of interest. Let's say he had a courtyard which wasn't going to be rented out. The owner's not even losing anything. And also the person, he's not even looking to rent. He's not even really benefiting. He has other areas where he can live, and so therefore you would have said, well, if there's no real benefit, maybe it's not a problem of ribis. So it's teaching us that it does indeed look like ribis. He's getting this benefit of using the property, and it seems like ribis because he lent him money, and so therefore Rav Nachman says it's problematic. And Rashi continues and notes, now we can learn from here, that a person is not allowed to lend money, that it's going to be on a house, that he's going to get to live in it, even if there's like a deduction, even if you have a situation where he's not getting it totally for free, it's still problematic. Because it says here also he can't rent it for a reduced rate. A reduced rate is also going to be a problem, so this would seem to be an issue of ribis. And it's not similar to the case of the collateral. Let's say the lender takes a collateral of a vineyard, so that was a similar kind of case. But over there, sometimes you're actually not going to take anything. And nevertheless, he's still going to be deducting. So he's really acquiring the produce in that case, again with deduction, but it's all really with a doubt. But over here, when you're actually just living in the property, it's a constant benefit the person is getting. There is no doubt about getting that benefit. That benefit is certain. So it comes out that he's getting a definite benefit by renting it for less than the going rate, and that's why it's more of a problem over here than in the case later on that we're going to see with the vineyard. And the Gemara continues, Zika Diamri, there are those that say a different version of the above Gemara as follows. Amar Rav Yosef bar Menyume, Amar Rav Nachman. Rav Yosef bar Menyume says that Rav Nachman says, even though they say that if somebody lives in the courtyard of his friend without his knowledge, he does not need to pay him rent, but let's say a person says, lend me money, and then in exchange for that, and then you can live in my courtyard, so in that case, he does need to pay rent, otherwise it's a problem of ribis. And the Gemara notes, Man da'amar hilveyu, the one whose language is hilveyu, meaning to say the loan was made and it wasn't originally stipulated anything about living in the borrower's house. So kol shekein halveni. So if hilveyu is a problem when there was no stipulation, certainly in a case where he says, lend me money, and in exchange for that, not only will I pay you back what you lend me, you can stay in my house, kol shekein, for sure, that is going to be a problem of ribis, unless, of course, he pays the rent. Uman damar halveni, but according to the one who says that halveni is a problem, lend me the money and you can stay in the house, that's a problem. Aval hilveu lo, but if it's just a case where he happened to lend him money, and then the borrower happened to also let him stay in his house, so that would not necessarily be a problem. My time, what's the reason? Kavan to make kar lavadai to dachi ozve, since he didn't lend the money on that understanding that he would get to live in his house, so less lanba, so it's not a concern, meaning to say it's not a concern of ribis. And Rashi explains, Mandamar Hilveyu velo kotzatz imo al minas loder. He didn't set it up the loan he didn't set up the loan that it's on the condition that now you're allowed to live in my property because you're lending me money. And even though he didn't set it up that way, it's still prohibited. So kol shekain halveni. So certainly if he said lend me the money in exchange that you can live in my property, the kotzatz lo diras habayis b'toras ribis. So then he essentially set up living in the house as interest. That would certainly be a problem. If you say halveni is the problem, so then we say only halveni is a problem. Halvei lo. But if he just happened to lend him the money and he happens to be staying in his house, that would not be a problem. And according to that, then you'll explain our Mishnah where it is a problem, where he set it up that way, or b'shas matan mo. So lachar kain, he either set it up that way at the time of giving the money, or he set it up that way subsequently. And the Gemara continues, Rav Yosef Bar Chama tokif avdei de inshi the masik behu zuzei va'ovid behu avidata. Rav Yosef Bar Chama would seize the slaves of people who owed him money, and he would use those slaves to do work for him. Amar le Rava Berei, so Rava his son, meaning Rava the son of Rav Yosef Bar Chama, Rava said to his father, my time of it, Marhachi, why is the master doing this? That you're seizing these avodim, you're using them for work, and you're not even paying for the services. So Amar le said back to him, Anok Rav Nachman sviruli, I hold like Rav Nachman. The Amar Rav Nachman, because Rav Nachman says, Avda nahom krise lo shavi, a slave is not even worth the value of the bread that you put in his stomach. He ends up eating more than the work that he does, and therefore I'm not causing any loss to the owner of these slaves, and I don't have to pay them. And so the Gemara says, Amar Le said back to him, Amor Damar of Nachman. So you can say that if Nachman made that comment, Kagon Dari Avde. That was talking about, for example, his own slave Dari, the market Bekuvi, who dances among the wine barrels. He doesn't do any work. So by that particular Evid, he wasn't worth anything. There's no loss. But Avdi Achrini, but let's say other slaves, Miyamar, would he say by other slaves? Certainly other slaves, they do more work than the amount they're consuming by staying at the owner's house. And so the Gemara says, Amar Le, he said back to him, Anoki hod Rav Daniel bar Rav Katina, Amar Rav Svirali. I hold like what Rav Daniel bar Rav Katina said, that Rav said to Yamar, because he says, Hatokef avdo shel chavero, if somebody seizes the slave of his friend, V'yosabo malacha, and uses that slave for work, so pater, he's exempt. And Rashi explains, Takif avdi de inchi de masik buzuzi, he seized the avodim of people that owed him money, machzik be'avdeim shel balei chovos, meaning again, he seized these slaves of those who owed him money, shel balei chovos shelo, v'chovim lasos malachtu, he forced these slaves to do his work. And at first he said the reason is because nahom krise, meaning lechem achalu, is not even worth the bread that's fed to him. V'hareini zanu b'yom malachto, here I am, I'm feeding him on the day that he's working, and so really the owner's not losing anything. And so then the Gemara said, Dari avde kach shemo, his slave, the name was Dari, meaning to say, Rav Nachman's slave was named Dari. The market Bekuve, he used to dance among the wine barrels, Leitzon hayu merakid bechanuyos, lishtos yain, meaning he was always drinking wine, he was a drunk, and so that's why it applied by that particular slave, it wouldn't apply by other slaves. And so then he said, I hold like the statement of Rav Daniel bar Rav Katina Amarav, that again, when somebody seizes the eved of his friend, and he uses that eved for work, he is potter. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Samech Hey Amud Aleph.